Domestic violence affects both men and women. In Kentucky, more than 45% of women, that's nearly 1 in 2, and 35% of men experience intimate partner physical violence or rape in their lifetime. That is unacceptable. As a son, as a husband, and as a father of an 11-year-old girl, this is a change we absolutely have to make. We must all lend our voices to speaking out against domestic violence and work to stop it right now. I appreciate those working every day to do so and support survivors, but there is still so much work to be done. As Attorney General, I saw firsthand the suffering and the long-term trauma experienced by children and families affected by domestic violence and sexual assault. And we fought hard to protect and then also to seek justice for them. We increased investigations and charged a record number of child predators and human traffickers. We fought against rollbacks of protections for campus sexual assault survivors. We also made sure that Kentucky would never have a rape kit backlog ever again. Then we created a cold case unit to seek justice by going after and indicting predators who had evaded charges for far too long. We're the first office in the nation to support and form a survivors council made up of members who had suffered from violent crime. I'm going to tell you that that's one of the most important and meaningful things that I've had the opportunity to participate in as a public servant. Those individuals, those members, are some of the strongest people that I have ever met. Each one has turned tragedy into triumph, and I'm proud to call a number of them friends and close friends. 3 years ago, we launched Green Dot, a bystander violence prevention program for the entire Attorney General's office, and I'm proud to say we've provided comparable training to all of our members of state government. That training is about empowering citizens to make proactive and reactive choices every day to prevent child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, and other personal violence. It's about taking action, about when you see something wrong, about saying something, about doing something, about knowing that you might be the only person standing in the way of continued abuse, of further harm, of a child being in danger. That a simple call by you could make all the difference in the world for another human being. I'd hope that's something that we've learned during COVID, that everybody counts and each one of us has a responsibility to every other person, especially those that are in harm's way. As your governor, my administration remains resolute in our fight to seek justice and healing for victims and survivors. I want Kentuckians to know they have an advocate working for them, lifting up their voice and working for that day that no one will be ever subjected to this type of violence, this type of terror ever again. Since taking office, we've awarded more than $60 million in grant funding to provide victim services throughout Kentucky. And last Thursday, Justice and Public Safety Cabinet Secretary Kerry Harvey and I announced more than $29 million in funding for 132 victim service providers across the Commonwealth to increase advocacy efforts. As of 2020, 125,216 victims in the Commonwealth have been served thanks to the Federal Victims of Crime Act program. In July, we announced nearly $2 million in grant funding is available to the Commonwealth to fight violence against women. And in July, we announced a $1.5 million federal grant awarded to form the Kentucky State Police Sexual Assault Kit Initiative and Investigative Team. This initiative moved 3 trained investigators and a criminal intelligence analyst from the Office of the Attorney General to the Kentucky State Police to investigate and identify sexual offenders, to leverage existing investigative resources within the KSP Crime Lab. KSP's statewide investigative jurisdiction and existing connections with local law agencies are such a help. And it's important. It's important that we are supporting advocacy efforts. It's important that we are supporting those investigative efforts. But it's also important that we continue to invest in helping our victims and survivors navigate and understand the criminal justice system. We certainly recognized in the Attorney General's office that it is a difficult and often confusing process that can re-traumatize an individual that has already been through so much. Ensuring, whether it's Vine or others, that there are resources and victims advocates there to help that survivor is so critical. It's really a change in thinking. We always thought that the most important person involved in any crime is the perpetrator. Listen, they're important. We need to prosecute. We need to ensure that we seek justice against that person, but it's who we're seeking justice for that is the most important person involved in any violent crime, and that's the victim. And whether it's legislative changes, I'll talk about in a minute, or the funding to ensure they get the resources and help they need, we always have to continue to be focused on that victim, whether it's victim-centered investigation, the types of therapy and support that are out there, lifting up the amazing providers. We have some of them here today. We can't ever lose our focus right there, because those are the human beings that have been harmed, and that we all have a duty to help heal. We've also championed legislative action like House Bill 310, sponsored by Senator Morgan McGarvey, which closed a gap in state law that had previously allowed some defendants to avoid both prison time and to avoid mental health treatment, which they very much needed. KSP's Victim Advocate Support Services has also helped by connecting crime victims or those involved in traumatic events with immediate resources such as mental health services, crisis intervention, or legal support. I was actually really proud of that Survivors Council for creating the first guide, the first almost handbook that they could hand someone who's been the victim of a crime, or their families, someone who has been there, that in many ways embodies that there can be a better tomorrow, reaching out and providing that resource. Also, Kentucky's domestic violence programs and shelters are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and are safe for survivors and their families. These shelters have remained open safely, even during the COVID-19 pandemic, which took heroic efforts by everyone who works for or helps or supports those facilities. I want to thank everyone at those facilities or anywhere else who's fighting the right fight, who's standing up for people that have been harmed. And your work was always incredible. To do it in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic is something incredible. It's more than anyone could ever ask, and no one had to. You were there and you weren't going to stop. Across Kentucky, we also have many great advocates working to end domestic violence and to protect Kentuckians. In a few moments, you'll hear from one, Pat Byron. Pat's the mother of Mary Byron, who was murdered by her ex-boyfriend in Jefferson County on her 21st birthday, December 6th, 1993. That makes her just about my age. Mary had no idea she was in danger because she thought her former boyfriend was still in jail on charges for harming her. Her family had requested the jail staff notify them upon this release, but the notification never came. Mary's parents, Pat and John Byron, were determined to prevent other families from experiencing this type of tragedy. And when we see people step up and do that, that very easily could be simply even paralyzed by grief, but reaching out to make sure that other people don't go through the same thing. You see a little bit of God in that. It's really special, and we can't thank you enough for your work for other people. The result was the nation's first automated system to notify victims about offenders being released. Mike Davis, who's also here with us today, and his partner, Young Win, developed that system called the Victim Information and Notification Every Day, better simply known as the VINE system. And they unveiled it on the one-year anniversary of Mary's untimely death. In 1996, Kentucky became the first state in the nation to implement VINE statewide. Today, VINE provides more than 10 million notifications each year across 43 states. Thanks to the work of Mary and John, thanks to the work of Mike and his companies. Now, more than 90% of victims throughout the United States benefit from this groundbreaking work championed by the Byrons. Not just helping people in their community, but now helping people all over our country. Our state and our nation are forever grateful to this family for taking their personal tragedy but creating a system that helps so many other individuals. We all have a role to play in creating a bright and a safe future. And as a parent myself, it's something that we have to do, something that we can't stop working on. Our kids deserve a better world. Each and every one of them deserves a better world. And as responsible adults, it's our job to do something about it. Not just to complain or to talk about it, but to actually do something about it. So this month, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and every month, every week, every day, we must recommit to protecting our fellow Kentuckians and standing with survivors of these heinous acts. So, see something, say something, notice something, do something. We are all a part if we want to create that safer world. So I encourage you to reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline if you know of someone who needs help. Remember, you might be the only person in a position to make the call or willing to, and someone's life would be so much better off for it. That number is 1-800-799-SAFE, or you can visit kcadv.org. We cannot and we will not solve this crisis alone. I have a daily commitment to wake up each morning focused on creating a better Kentucky. That's got to be a safer Kentucky. And as we look at some amazing, incredible announcements that suggest a brighter future than any of us might have ever thought was possible, we can't reach that if almost 1 in 2 women are going through some form of violence, if 35% of men are experiencing that partner violence. We cannot achieve our potential with our people being harmed every single day. And our morals, our values, and our faith ought to push us to create that better world where no one ever has to experience that type of fear, of terror, of harm, or even of death. Let's be a leader in this nation. All we have to do is what's right and not tolerate domestic violence, not once, not ever. Now, I'd like to ask Carrie Harvey, Secretary of the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet, to make an announcement about significant enhancements the Department of Corrections rolled out this month to improve the state's Victim Notification Center. Secretary Harvey.
Thank you, Governor. Thank all of you for being here this morning, and thank you, Governor Beshear, for your commitment to the victims of domestic violence and for your work to help crime victims generally. Your work on behalf of crime victims has been a cornerstone of your service to the people of Kentucky. I'm happy to join you in that work. In my career, I've had the chance to observe firsthand the terrible cost of domestic violence to Kentucky families. I served as a county attorney back in the late 80s and early 90s in one of our counties, and in those days, we had neither the laws nor the technology that we have today to protect the victims of domestic violence. One consequence of that was that every time our local sheriff's department was required to arrest somebody for committing an act of domestic violence, an arrest warrant was required, and I wrote those arrest warrants. That means that I spent a lot of time in lonely courthouses, usually in the middle of the night, with victims of domestic violence. I learned a little bit about this terrible problem in those times and through that experience. Domestic violence, as the governor said, is not bounded by racial, economic, or even gender lines. Perpetrators don't neatly fit any particular stereotype. Domestic violence imposes terrible pain on its victims, and its victims are often children. It's a pain that can't always be healed by doctors and medicine, and it isn't easily treated. It leaves lifelong scars. Without effective intervention, domestic violence often becomes generational as the abused become abusers. Domestic violence destroys families. It destroys the very idea of family, and it imposes cost on those directly affected, but also on society generally. All of us must work to deal with this terrible problem if our Commonwealth is to be the home for our children and grandchildren that we want it to be. There are a lot of good people who are doing tremendous work in this area. The Vine system is a wonderful example of the good work that is going on today in Kentucky. Kentucky's first in the nation Vine system is an incredible tool for victims. Vine, or Victim Information and Notification Everyday System, is a free automated system that alerts victims about the change in the status of an offender. Victims can know when an offender is about to be released. This is vitally important, potentially life-saving information. And I want to personally thank Pat Byron and Mike Davis for their incredible work in creating this first in the nation system. You know, when a person who has suffered an unspeakable tragedy can find the strength to create from that something good that now serves people, as the governor said, throughout the nation, not just our Commonwealth. Well, my friends, that is the purest distillation of heroism. And ma'am, you are indeed a hero. Thank you for all that you've done. 2021 marks the 25th anniversary of Vine's statewide launch in Kentucky. Last year, there were 322,000 notifications and more than 75,000 new registration. But Vine continues to improve and evolve as technology changes. In 2020, Governor Beshear announced $551,000 in additional grant funding to improve our system. Consequently, the Department of Corrections launched Kentucky Enhanced Vine, which includes important new features on September 28 of this year. These features make it easier for victims to use. It makes the information more accurate and more accessible. It will do more good and it will save more lives. And the Vine system will not be static. It will continue to grow. It will continue to improve as technology improves. I mentioned the Department of Corrections, and I want to acknowledge DOC's Victim Services Branch for working closely with crime victims to assist them as they navigate our legal system. Vine is a big part of that assistance. Commissioner Cookie Cruz and Eleanexis Hall, these ladies sitting in the back here trying not to be seen, but we see you back there, Commissioner, and her staff do a wonderful job for the people of Kentucky, and we appreciate and acknowledge your work. So as you can see, there are a lot of good things happening. And you can see that there are a lot of advocates here today who are assisting with this good work. But unfortunately, there is much more work to do. This problem still is with us and still plagues our society. It's work that we must do, and we must do it well. Thank you all for being a part of that.
Thank you, Secretary Harvey, and thanks to everyone at the Department of Corrections for your work to address this societal wrong. Next, we have Angela Yaneli, Chief Executive Officer of the Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And if I can, Angela and her organization has been doing great work for a very long time. We consider them a close partner, a big part of Team Kentucky, and couldn't be more proud of their advocacy. And I think they make us a nationwide model about how we ought to go about seeking and securing lasting change.
Thank you, Governor Beshear, for hosting us today and for continuing to shine a spotlight on the urgent public health issue of domestic violence that affects so many Kentuckians. What do we know about domestic violence? Well, as the governor said, we know that almost half of Kentucky women have experienced physical violence, sexual violence, and/or stalking during their lifetime. But did you know that this is the highest rate in the United States? We know that the cost of intimate partner violence in our country exceeds $9 billion, of which $6.3 billion of that is for direct health care services. We know that 1 in 9 women and 1 in 48 men have experienced stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime, in which they felt very fearful or believed that they or someone close to them would be harmed or killed. And we know that domestic violence is underreported, often due to a survivor's fear of retaliation from their abuser, such as threats to their children or pets, fear that they may lose custody of their children, or just fear that no one would believe them, or fear that they don't have enough resources to make it on their own. Let's take the story of Carla, for instance. After 8 attempts at leaving, she finally secured a safe place to live and a job that could support her and her 3 young children. But when she goes to work, her abuser repeatedly makes harassing calls to her workplace, threatening her sense of safety and her ability to do her job. He knows if she loses her job, she may feel she has no other choice than to return to him. The story of domestic violence in Kentucky is the story of our friends, our families, our neighbors, our communities. Our dream is for those stories to become stories of healing, recovery, and peace. This year, we mark our 40th anniversary. For 40 years, survivors have been able to look to Kentucky's strong network of regional domestic violence shelters to keep them safe and move them towards a life free of violence. We feed and clothe and help heal bodies and spirits. We go to court with survivors in solidarity because we believe them. We listen and we support and we do not judge. We empower survivors to control their lives and claim their rights. We find affordable housing and we help remove barriers to self-sufficiency. We are tired, but we show up every day, every night, every hour, even in the midst of a pandemic. We are the hundreds of essential domestic violence advocates across the Commonwealth. For 40 years, Kentucky has relied on the experience and expertise of the Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence to share public awareness about the prevalence and effects of domestic violence, to promote primary prevention programming, and to work towards systemic and cultural changes that promote healthy people, healthy families, and healthy relationships. Today, we cast back over the past 40 years, taking what we have learned and experienced so that we can leap forward towards the horizon, a vision of where all people have what they need to thrive. As we move into the next 40 years, I challenge all of us to find the way to end domestic violence in our homes and communities by stopping it before it occurs. Let's create a culture where domestic violence is not acceptable, where healthy relationships are the norm and are promoted and supported, and where all Kentuckians feel safe, welcomed, and valued. We invite each of you to imagine alongside of us.
So it's now my honor to welcome Pat Byron and Mike Davis. Pat, Mike, would you join us?
Thank you, Governor. Kentucky doesn't get to be first a lot. And when you think about the Commonwealth and what most people in the country quickly will think of bourbon and horse racing. But the fact is, what happened here 25 years ago was significant, not just in Kentucky, but nationally. It was in this very room 25 years ago that the Commonwealth of Kentucky committed to be the first state in the nation to offer an automated victim notification program to all of its victims, not just the victims who live in Louisville, our largest city, where the system was pioneered, but every victim in the state. And it was a concept that was very foreign at that time. The tragedy that the Byron family experienced was not unique. It happened in cities all across the country. What was unique is that we had a family who decided to put pressure on doing something and force change. And we had a community that stepped up. And when that community stepped up, they said, we're going to solve this problem of victims not knowing when an offender is being released or has an important event. And while Mary's story has become nationally well known, the Byrons have been all over the country championing this idea, and her story has been told thousands of times. It's known in many, many states. But I think the most important story is one that many of you have long ago forgotten. You may have seen it, because just a few weeks after Louisville launched Vine, and suddenly victims in our community could call a phone, register, and be alerted if that person who they were afraid of was released. There was another young woman in Louisville, and this is a week or two after the system went on live. And Judge Armstrong had a press event that night because she also had been abused by a boyfriend she was breaking up with. And she was afraid that he was going to hurt her. And that young woman, back then, we didn't have cell phones very prevalent. She was going shopping to the mall, but she had signed up for this brand new system called Vine. And her mother signed up and her sister signed up. And she went off on her day shopping. Well, her mother got the phone call saying that this person had been released and was panicked. And what she did was she drove to the mall. She found her daughter walking around the mall, literally found her. And they called the Jefferson County Police and said, my boyfriend's been released. I'm afraid to go home, but I have to get my things. Can you help me? And the police escorted her to her house. And when they searched her house, they found him about an hour after he had released in her bedroom in a closet with a butcher knife waiting for her to come home. And that young woman, whose story is never told, is a young woman who got to live that day and avoid a terrible tragedy and went on to have a life that Mary didn't get to have. And when you think about the numbers that today, because Kentucky stepped up and because this Commonwealth was a leader, we make 10 million of those notifications a year. And that's been going on now for 25 years. So you do the math and you tell me how many Mary Byrons are alive with their families raising grandchildren today because the Commonwealth was a leader, right? And that's what this story is about. It's about taking this. I think of domestic violence much like a disease. We've spent 2 years in a pandemic, and we know the seriousness of a disease that you can't control. But this is a disease that has a 50% probability of affecting your daughter, your wife, your mother, right? And when this disease gets in your family, it can kill. It can certainly cause pain and suffering for the rest of your life. And it's likely to be propagated to your children. And when you think of it that way, I think it really resonates how serious we have to be to not just care about it and not just put the resources our government can put to it, but to make a change in your everyday life and not tolerate it in people you see and talk to, et cetera, right? And so this is a time, and again, it's a thing that we've got to be really proud of, but we can't stop. We've got to keep going, and I'm really proud that Kentucky has upgraded their Vine system to be even better, but even more so that it's something we can take the kind of pride in to realize what impact it's made throughout the country. And so with that, I have to always be grateful because without Pat and the work that her and John put in, I can't tell you how many states she went to make the case for why they should do what Kentucky started. And it's only because of their efforts and so many others that we've been able to get this national network built, and it's here and it's making a difference in many, many, many people's lives every day. So thank you, Pat. And I'll let you say anything you'd like to say, and then we'll wrap it up. Governor, thank you.
I think it's all been said. I'm not the great hero that you make out. It's all the wonderful people behind the scenes. Mike and his Vine system and all the shelters and places for domestic violence to be. I'm just very proud to be part of it. And I thank you all very sincerely for all your hard work on behalf of victims. Thank you very much.
You want to stay up here? I think we're going to sign this here.
Okay.
In the first chapter of James, we're told, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." I think we're living that out today to ensure that we not only address this now, but if you're a parent like me, that we raise children that will also never, ever, ever tolerate this type of epidemic that we as a society have been living through for far too long. So today, we're going to sign a proclamation declaring October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in Kentucky. So I'd ask that Pat, stay up here. Mike, come on back up. Angela, Secretary Harvey, Commissioner Cruz, and Darlene, we can't do this without you either. So why don't you come up and join us as well for the amazing work and advocacy that you do. Darlene has my cell phone. She has known how to use it when there are needs. And because of that, I think we've been able to do more. Okay. Y'all want to fill in? These are normally open.
Yeah, I was gonna say, they should make your job work today. See?
Full service government.
Yeah, I tell you.
There we go. Look up. And here we go. All right.
Great.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
So y'all, great work. Absolutely.
Thank you, Governor.
You guys can share.
That's right. All right, we can serve.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor.
Thank you very much.
See you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for everything. Diapers.
Yes. That's what you need.
Awesome. We did. It was fabulous.
Yeah.
But all your support during the pandemic
It's going to continue.
and the call out, like we got so many calls from victims.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember. Absolutely. Oh. Darlene and her group is along with all of our other facilities across the Commonwealth do such a good job. We were just talking about different things during the pandemic where they provided such great guidance and the coalition about what types of messages needed to be communicated and how. And it was amazing to see the Commonwealth with just one request, maybe two, about things that were needed to come together and to provide them. I'd end by saying everybody who lends their voice or a little bit of effort to do the right thing can be changed in all the right ways. I remember the first shop and share that was put together to provide aid to our shelters and other programs. I also remember that at the last minute, there was some transportation issues. And so I got a call from then First Lady Jane Beshear asking me to pick everything up in Louisville. And I remember doing it because I didn't want my mom to be mad at me. But I remember the way it felt at the end of the day. I remember getting to look at everything that we had piled up here in the Capitol Dome, knowing that we're going to go to people in need. I was certainly changed that day to see the amount of purpose in doing right is greater than any form of compensation could ever provide. So I want to thank everybody. God bless, and we'll open it up to some questions. We've got a number today where if you got one, just call it out. We won't have to go through it. Tom, it wouldn't be a press conference without a Tom Latek question.
Thank you, Governor. And I don't know who would like to take this, but we'll start with you. And if you want to do a handoff, or
Yeah.
That works for me. Voters approved Marcy's law in the 2020 election. How do you and the advocates see Marcy's law affecting the vine system and also domestic violence here in Kentucky?
Well, I think Marcy's law is really important, and it was a very good step. Obviously, we're going to have to work through some of the pieces of it, But the criminal justice system is so complicated and it's so challenging. From an outsider, why do you have to have multiple hearings spread out over all of these days? And to understand what's going on, how long it can take, can really re-traumatize an individual and a family that are going through it. And it recognizes that it's not just the person the crime's been committed against, their entire family are victims of what's happened. Sometimes entire communities, when we look at larger acts of violence. It creates an extra requirement and methods to ensure that victims are always heard, that they are always involved. So it goes beyond just the Department of Corrections to other parts of the criminal justice system. You want to add anything, Angela? Nope. Okay.
Governor, you talked about lots of things that have been done over the past couple of decades to fight domestic violence. I'd be interested in hearing from you, as well as Angela and Secretary Harvey or anybody, what you think maybe the top 2 or 3 things are that we could do moving forward, either legislative or resources or just individuals.
Well, no one wants to be known as having the highest rate of domestic violence in the country, but I am glad that people are reporting it. I mean, the fact that we see some of those statistics, I think, show that we are and continue to work on decreasing any stigma that goes along with reporting domestic violence, that we are encouraging folks when they see something wrong to do something. I truly believe moving forward, it's about accepting that collective responsibility that in many ways we've been so good at in COVID. We've had to wake up every day living for one another, making sure we don't take an action that harms somebody else. Well, it's a pretty easy transition to say, I've seen something wrong. I think somebody is in trouble, and I'm going to do something as easy as making a phone call about it. You know, it never leaves me that the first trafficking victim we saved when I was Attorney General was a 16-year-old girl that we rescued the Thursday before Derby, my first year being AG. It's because a hotel clerk saw something that just looked odd and picked up the phone and made a call. And that individual has a shot at life, still is going to bear that trauma. But my goodness, where would she be without that call? You know, we're all our brother and sister's keeper. And I believe the more that we can encourage people to just do right by others, and the more that we can address this. But then let's also set expectations for everybody out there that this is never acceptable, ever. To engage in violence against a partner, every one of our voices has to say it's not right. And then we've all got to commit. I mean, when 1 in 2 Kentucky women is suffering some form of sexual violence in their lifetime, it takes all of us, men included, to ensure that everyone hears that it's not acceptable and we're going to do something about it every day. Angela, you want to add on to that? Here.
We are actually in the process right now of developing our legislative agenda. So we would love to be able to send you some more information on that. I will tell you that where we're coming from is, as the governor said, from a point of prevention. We obviously want to address healthy relationships. We want to have good education in the school systems. Unemployment insurance is one of our big bills and asks. Always funding. Have to say that no matter what. Also, we want to address the domestic violence homicides. For a past few years, we have been trying to have some kind of legislation to help us get better counts on domestic violence homicides. And so that will still probably be one of our higher priorities.
Yes.
My question is, so with this VINE program, I mean, just being notified upon the decision is going to be released, how is that going to assist the victims?
So the VINE system notifies you at multiple levels as the case goes through. It's supposed to when different hearings are, when there is a release. Secretary, when there's a parole hearing too, right, is in VINE. So it tries to, as a victim, you shouldn't have to actively monitor the case of your perpetrator, of somebody that has harmed you. Again, the amount of stress and trauma that can cause is avoidable. And this is a way to provide that information, to provide it to extended family members. You can determine who wants to sign up to receive it. If you're not in a place where you're ready for that, you can have another loved one get that information for you. And then with additional pieces of Marcy's Law is to ensure that you know where someone who could cause you violence is, where in the process that case may be, where in their incarceration that might be. And then with the other pieces that are out there, getting the system explained to you. I think it can provide additional physical safety. I think it can provide important information that you can go to providers that can help you deal with that trauma and that healing. If you know that a major hearing's coming up, you know that may cause that trauma to resurface or manifest, maybe a trigger, and thus being able to reach out to your mental health professional at that time. So if people can surround themselves with the services that are out there, and we need to make sure everybody has, this is a tool that can help in that whole process of healing. Yes.
Going back to the conversation of prevention solutions, thinking about gun laws, are there any legislative actions you think will be taken just to maybe do background checks on gun transfers? I know that's something that's not done in Kentucky. Maybe someone who's worried, but it has not risen to the level of violence yet. Maybe they're asking that guns be removed from the home. Is there anything of that nature that are being considered?
Well, there's certainly both laws on the books, and then there's laws that may be in other places. There's certainly room for improvement on laws that are on the books, enforcements of DVOs and EPOs. I do not expect that this General Assembly would pass any gun-related laws, though. All right. Well, again, I want to thank all of our advocates, family members, everybody who's worked so hard to provide that extra layer of protection. I want to commit this administration, Justice Cabinet, Department of Corrections, but everybody else is committed to joining you in this fight. And that's going to include us continue the training we do for our own employees, because every additional person who knows what to look for in Green Dot or other training might just be able to make that call that saves somebody's life. Thank you all very much.